We are talking Nobody Sleeps in the Woods Tonight 2, the sequel to 2020's Polish slasher film. Same director and co-writer here, but with a largely new cast, and it's a direct follow-on from the last film. So the last film introduced us to these two kind of slasher brothers, if you like, that had been infected by a meteorite to go on a kind of a killing spree. And this one picks off, as I say, more or less kind of a day or so after that original movie. And we have the brothers have been picked up and put in prison along with the kind of the final girl from the last movie. And the movie, this one, focuses on this meek, kind of mild-mannered police officer with kind of, you know, dreams of becoming a kind of an action hero and stuff like this. But it turns out he's put to the test when someone different gets infected by this kind of meteor and becomes like a crazed alien slasher monster. It kind of goes on the rampage, and we have a dwindling kind of group of survivors trying to kind of fight off this menace. We also have somewhat of a left turn on the round of the third act that kind of changes the status quo. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So I quite enjoyed the original 2020 movie, and I'm not a huge slasher fan, but that one I found somewhat kind of fresh and enjoyable. How does this one fare? Okay, so let's talk about what I think works in this movie. As with the first movie, I do think this is a very well shot film. It is a Polish film, but I still feel it's very accessible despite being kind of obviously a foreign language. The characters are, you know, very kind of well defined, you know, and easily kind of recognisable, sympathetic. They are kind of made to be kind of either likeable or despicable, depending on kind of who you're talking about. There was a high amount of gore in this movie. There is. It takes a little bit of more of a sci-fi bent than the kind of the first film, but there's certainly just as much kind of gore, if not more, gory sequences in this movie than there were in the first one. With people's kind of insides kind of getting pulled out and people kind of ripped in half and such like that. The movie does try and be a little bit more original, I would say. The first movie was clearly an attempt to kind of have a Polish version of movies like Wrong Turn and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This one leans more into sort of science fiction elements with an added up in the comedy also. So it's kind of a comedy sci-fi horror here, with a great more focus on the as I say, the kind of the comedy elements here. Now, in the first movie, one of my critiques was that they introduced this kind of science fiction element, the kind of the way these kind of like these two brothers had got kind of infected by this kind of meteorite, and one of my critiques was they didn't really do much with it. Here, this second movie is pretty much all about that. So it ends up being, as I say, much more sort of science fiction and kind of leaning more into the kind of maybe what's that's all about. So those of you who like a bit more science fiction would be you know, enjoying this one a little bit more. The effects are still pretty good. I actually think it's slightly a bit of a step down, to be honest with you, which we'll talk about in a minute. Nonetheless, there are still some impressive special effects on display. And again, for the kind of the it's always hard to judge acting when you're talking about foreign language film, but I thought at least the kind of the main couple of actors here did a decent enough job in making kind of like believable and likeable kind of characters, and you kind of believe them in their roles. Albeit this one is more of a comedic movie than the last film, I would say. It does try and have a little bit of meta commentary, and even try to have a little bit of you know, philosophy in regards to what is true evil and what does that actually mean. Does it do anything with it? Nope, but there you go, it's at least introduced. So let's talk about what doesn't work. As I've mentioned, I really enjoyed the first film, and not really being a slasher fan, this one I didn't think worked as well, to be honest. So let's talk about why that was. I think the story here is a lot more unfocused than the first film. The story is somewhat kind of meandering, and it really doesn't feel particularly kind of focused. And the reason for it is I think the movie's trying to kind of build up to this kind of third act left turn. And as such, the story up until that point kind of feels like it's not really kind of going anywhere. There's not really a clear kind of narrative flow within the movie, because ultimately what the film wants to do is kind of get you to this kind of third act twist at the beginning of the third act, so it can kind of change direction ultimately and kind of challenge your expectations. But the problem is that the movie suffers because of that and becomes somewhat meandering in the kind of the meantime. As I mentioned, the special effects are still impressive, but this one has more noticeable kind of composite shots and CGI enhancements than the first one did, so I don't think the effects look quite as effective here than in the first movie. It also somewhat kind of like almost contradicts the first film in some degrees in regards to the origins. As far as I remember, the kind of the media didn't instantly affect the two brothers in the first film like they did in this one. It was more of a gradual kind of state of affairs, whilst this one it seems to affect people instantaneously and kind of turn them into these kind of like these monsters and things like this, which didn't seem, if memory serves, I could be wrong about that at least, it kind of seems like that wasn't the case in the first film. It was a bit more of a gradual kind of like change in everything. And this is what I mean by leaning more into the science fiction elements. It goes a lot more into that, and we kind of see these kind of elements that don't really make a lot of sense. And let me put it like this: we are led to believe, there's a discussion about motivation of the kind of our antagonists, and it's kind of just glossed over. And I thought, as with the first movie, it kind of introduces this idea. I think, oh, it's going to do something interesting, and then doesn't. And it does the same thing here. There's a discussion here with some antagonists about the nature of evil and how they are the bad guys and why they do what they do. And I thought, okay, this is going to be kind of like, an interesting discussion about, how they see themselves, how the kind of, what they deem as evil and etc. But it doesn't do that. It kind of introduces this idea and then does absolutely kind of nothing with it. The comedic elements here, I also feel are too broad. For example, we have this kind of rinky-dink kind of like little police station with like comedy kind of police who really seem like, quite frankly, caricatures rather than kind of real characters. And when you compare this to the first one, which still had a comedic edge, but I still felt that you could like believe the characters to a certain degree. This one, it's like too far. The kind of the police chief, even our kind of our main kind of protagonist, we get these two kind of like I don't know what they were supposed to be, some sort of like territorial defence force or something. Again, it's played for laughs, and the humour, because of we already have an established sort of tone within the first movie. This one seems very kind of broad and sort of it undercuts the first film to a certain degree. And as I said, I think that the whole narrative is a little bit kind of messy with this film, seeming somewhat directionless, because it's really you feel this movie's the whole game plan here is to kind of get you to the point of the beginning of the third act where it kind of changes direction. I didn't think the makeup was quite as good than the first film. The antagonists don't look quite as good. They seem a little bit overpowered. Again, it's just trying to ramp up and I think do things a little bigger, but not necessarily better than I think the first film. And ultimately, it's not a bad film. It's still well shot and it has some fun elements and some kind of gore, but ultimately it becomes largely forgettable, I would say. I suspect there may be a third movie in the horizon of this one, probably leaning further into the kind of science fiction. But nonetheless, this was slightly disappointing without necessarily being bad, but just really quite forgettable, I have to say. So this one's going to be a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.